There we go. Okay. So we're recording this now. So I'm very excited about this talk, and I would like to welcome and thank him for coming and introduce Victor Leyva-Grado. He is Director of Preclinical Immunology and Animal Models over at Oro Vaccines. And so the title of the talk is One Health at the Crossroads of Human Health, Animal Health, and Ecosystem Health. So he's covering lots of topics here today that I think are exciting for a lot of us. And so I actually am just going to turn it right over to him so he can explain what all of that means. And actually, one more thing. As you're listening to him, if you have questions, pop them right into the chat. We can generally do questions at the end. If there's a question, if something's not clear and you want him to sort of clarify something, either, speak up and ask him, or pop it in the chat and I'll ask him. But otherwise we'll do questions at the end. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Victor and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Regina. So good evening, everyone. I'm gonna share my screen so you can start seeing my slides. And then presentation mode. All right. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Can you guys see my screen? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, sorry. We have a baby at home and 2 cats. So you hear some noises of a baby or a cat, that's part of the family, okay? All right. So I just want to give you a little bit of my background before we start, and then you will realize why this topic is dear to me. I am originally from Mexico, from northern Mexico, and I got my doctor of veterinary medicine in Mexico City, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and I worked there for a few years, working with the small animals, sheep and goats, doing some research there. And then I moved to the Pacific Northwest, Washington State University, where I pursued graduate studies, and I obtained my PhD in veterinary sciences, working with neurovirulence of virus infections. After I graduated from Washington State, I moved to New York City to work at the Mount Sinai, or the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, working with Dr. Peter Palesi in the influenza group, working among other things with trying to develop a universal influenza vaccine, and also trying to find new antivirals other than the Tamiflu that we already know. So we're trying to develop some new antivirals. After a few years there and becoming an assistant professor, I decided to jump into industry. So my first job in industry was as a director of research at a small biotech in Brooklyn, New York, which the name is Applied Biological Laboratories. So I was there for a year, working also on developing antibodies against respiratory infections. And from there, I moved to Oro Vaccines, which is located in Pearl River, New York, where I became the director of preclinical immunology and animal models. And basically, the things we do is when the company, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the company later. So we develop vaccines, and my team is in charge of testing and making sure that these vaccines that we have developed produce a positive immune response, that is induce an immune response that would be protective before we test it in humans. And I don't know if tested sounds right, but before moving to clinical trials in humans, we have to develop preclinical studies to show that the vaccine is going to be effective and that it's not dangerous or toxic or anything like that. So my team is involved in that part. So even though I work there today, my presentation and all the opinions on this presentation are personal, so nothing to do with the company or the company policy. All right, so One Health, at the crossroads of human health, animal health, and the ecosystem's health. So what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna give you first the long version of the definition, and then I will give you the short version, which is easier to digest. So One Health is basically a collaboration between different sectors and multidisciplinary that involves people that works at the local level, with people involved in health for humans, for animals, with people that is involved in the protection of our ecosystems, and with the government and with international institutions, and all come together, try to find a way to prevent diseases or ideally to eradicate diseases from Earth. And they develop strategies to do or to achieve that goal. As you can imagine, I mean, if you are a physician and you are trying to work with rabies, for example, you know the human part of the rabies, but you don't necessarily know the animal component, which is the dog population that lives in the streets in many countries and stuff like that. So you need veterinary assistance on that way. And then you have companies that produce the vaccine. So everybody comes together and try to solve these disease problems. That's the reason the term One Health. So basically the idea is that people, or the health of people, or the well-being of people is connected to the health of the animals and our shared environment. As this slide says, when we protect one, we help to protect all. So you take care of the animals and the wildlife, that will help us and the environment. Vice versa, we protect the environment, that will help the wildlife, the livestock, and us too. And obviously we have a good health. It depends on also on animal health and the environment. So first thing I want to talk of the interactions. I'm just going to time myself so I don't go over. So the interactions between human and animal in disease. So there's a term that some of you have heard before, which is zoonotic diseases, and basically refers to diseases that are spread between animals and people. In this graph, you can see it at the left, different animal species, then the population, and at the point they interact and they share diseases. And as you see the arrows, they can go get diseases from animals, diseases to them. It seems that my internet is playing with me, so if you don't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll try to stop. So for one of the most recent examples, you hear that with some of the big cats in the Bronx Zoo, that they got COVID, and they got it from the person that was taking care of them. So that's one of the examples of us getting our animals infected. So it's the interaction between those two is called zoonotic diseases. Just to give you some little more data on that, 60% of the pathogens that cause human disease are coming from animals, either domestic animals, either livestock or pets, or wildlife. And I will give you some examples of that. 75% of emerging human pathogens, which is new diseases like SARS-CoV-2, are of animal origin. And 80% of the pathogens that are considered a bioterrorism threat, or potentially can be a bioterrorism threat, are originated in animals. And I'll use a case of a disease in animals that encompass all what I'm saying now. So why the animal diseases are important for us and for the environment? Well, I mentioned that we share some of those diseases and people get sick from diseases that are carried by animals. But that also has an economic impact. For example, more than 20% of the animal production losses are due to animal diseases. So you have a livestock facility of production, 20% of your losses are because your animals get sick. Projections from the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is part of the UN, so indicate that more than 70% of additional protein will be needed to feed the world in 2050. So this is important because animals are one of the main sources of protein, either through meat, through milk, or food products of them. So as the population grows, this need is going to grow. So it's important for us to keep those animals healthy. So another interesting statistic is that 75% of the billion people, so 1 billion people lives with 2 or less of $2 per day. So of that billion people, most of the income depends on farming and raising livestock. So if the environment is good, it's not good for farming, that impacts directly 1 billion people right there. Or if there is a disease that affects the livestock, cows, sheep, goat, that's is impacting right there 1 billion people around the world. So you see, it's not important just as a public health that there's diseases that affect us, but there is also an economic impact that it will affect the well-being of the population. So I'm going to use a case of a veterinary disease to try to give you an idea how these interactions may play a role on how the day work. This disease is called rinderpest. For those of you that speak German, I think it means cat plague. So this is a successful story at the end. First is because it's the first veterinary disease that was eradicated from the planet. That happened in 2011. So just for, if you are going to have a quiz in the future, you need, if I ask you what are the 2 diseases that have been eradicated from the face of the earth, one is this, and the other is in humans. I hope you know, if not, I can tell you at the end. So if rinderpest is a disease from animals, why is it important for humans? Why was it important for the world to have this One Health organization and try to bring together governments, people, money, everything to try to eradicate this? And the reason is because of the devastating effects on human population. So this disease is believed to been around for many centuries. And it comes as a, well, in humans, we call it pandemics. So in animals, we call it episodics instead of epidemics, but it's the same concept. So since early times, it's known that this disease is responsible for countless human deaths, but the reason people die is not because they are affected by the disease, but because the impact that has on the agricultural losses, which leads to famine and disease in people. One of the examples is the great Ethiopian famine. If you want to read a little bit, just look at the reference at the bottom. It's a sad story of what happened there, because the devastated of the domestic and wildlife and species, not only in Ethiopia, but all Eastern Africa, in some parts of Europe was pretty bad. It's estimated that in the Eastern Africa, between half to 2/3 of the population were lost due to the famine. So it was it has a great impact in my life to know that a veterinary disease that doesn't even affect humans can have this potential effect. So you can see here, that's the interaction that we talk about when we talk about One Health. So it's important to control this disease so we don't have problems with famine and disease in humans. Obviously, when this disease has the outbreaks in different times of the year, yeah, it affects cattle, which is important, but also affects wildlife. So populations of wallabies and all those wild animals were also affected. And as you know, if there's no animals to consume the plants, then there is a problem with the ecosystem. And then now when we do agriculture, we have these nice fancy machines to plow and to seed. But at that time, people use the animals to plow the soil and do the growth of the crop. So they couldn't do that because they don't have any animals. So there was a big problem and a big impact. So it has not only impact on human health, but it also has an economic impact, as you can imagine, and also an ecological impact. So how many diseases are there? Well, there's a lot. I just want to show you here what we call emerging diseases. And as I say, emerging diseases, we used to refer to diseases that are new. For example, influenza is not an emerging disease because it has been with us for many times. When there is a new variation of influenza, like as you can see, the fonts are very small, but here says H7N9 or H5N1 influenza. Those are emerging influenza infections because we don't have those viruses around. So we don't have vaccines against those. So there is a lot of newly emerging diseases. So here, obviously, you have SARS, either SARS-1 or SARS-2, which is currently around. We have NAPA virus, as you can see here in Southeast Asia. We have the flu pandemic of 2009, and so on and so on. So there's other diseases that they come and go. So there is some outbreaks and then disappear for several years and then resurface. For example, one of them, and probably you are familiar with, is dengue. So it's dengue in some populations and then disappear and then comes back again. Or West Nile virus, which is another infection that was not, for example, in the US, and it was bring to the US through horses that were imported to, I think it was New York. And from there, in 2 years, it spread to the whole country, affecting birds, horses, and some people. And we have an example here of deliberately emerging. And it was just basically refers to one that was created in the lab. And it was a case of anthrax bioterrorism. So as you can see, there is a lot of diseases that we need to be aware of. And we are trying to get solutions against these diseases, either with antivirals, either with vaccines. And probably you see the reference here, you probably are familiar with this last name, right? So that's the Anthony Fauci that you hear in the news. So he wrote this review with another collaborative NIH. So the health of humans, pets, livestock, and wildlife are all dependent on a healthy and balanced ecosystem. So they are so interconnected that we cannot protect one and then leave the other. So we always hear in the news, oh, I'm an environmentalist. Yeah, but if you're an environmentalist, you need to be also an animalist and a human lover too, you know, because we are all together. So I cannot say I love the animals and hate people, right? I mean, it can happen, but when we come to health, we have to take care of the three of them, right? Or we cannot say, oh yeah, I take care of the environment and global warming, and I don't care about the livestock in China or in Africa or in Mexico or in Colombia. But we have to care about that, and we need to take care of all of them, you know? One person cannot do everything, so it's gonna be something that we all have to take care of it. And I'll tell you at the end, what can you do from where you are now and in the future based on the career that you decide, the career path that you take. So protecting the environment is a fundamental part of human health defense. So that needs to be clear. So we don't protect the environment just because we want, just because it's cool. It's because that has a direct impact in our health and our animal health. So that's important to understand that those systems are interconnected. So just to give you an example of that, this graph. In the first circle, you can see, hopefully you can appreciate, it's a monkey there being happy in the forest. But actions that we take, like deforestation, land use intensification, so either to get the wood of the forest or to get grass for the animals. So what is going to happen is that we disturb the habitat of those animals. And they, in their environment or the microenvironment, they have, for example, viral infections that they circulate. They survive with them, they are adapted to that, there's no problem. And there's no problem for us because we've never been in contact with them, right? So the problem happens when we disturb this, and we, as humans, come here and we bring our cows and our chickens, stuff like that. So then those animals and the people around there get in contact with this wildlife and get in contact with those viruses. Was one example. There is a theory behind the origin of HIV that it originated from the simian immunodeficiency virus, right? So that was deep in the forest of the Congo, and the simians there, they had the virus and was circulating, then no problem, right? It was until humans we got in contact with that the virus it was adapted to humans, and then it's believed that became what we know as HIV. Yeah, but that's the first step. We disrupt the environment, and then what is going to happen is that these viruses and these diseases go to the population. Could be a localized place, a remote village in Africa, or we can spread, as you see in the stage 3, to everywhere, as it happened with, for example, again, which is the example that you may know the best, with SARS coronavirus 2. Where, yeah, it was an outbreak in a small area in China, and then now, because of the facilities that we have to travel around the world, so one sick person can be in another continent in a few hours. So if he or she is carrying the virus, it can carry it to other places. And you will see later on that that also applies for food. If we have contaminated pork bringing from other countries to the US, we can bring the disease to. Or as I mentioned with West Nile, there was a racing horse that was brought to the US and was carrying the virus. And then we got West Nile virus in the country. So many of the diseases that we share between humans and animals are transmitted by vectors. And as you know, ticks, fleas, and mosquitoes are one of the most important vectors transmitting diseases. As you can see in this graph, these diseases can be transmitted to us, to our pets, to our livestock, or to the wildlife. And that can be a problem because those diseases will cause serious illness either in humans or in pets. If you like hiking, you always hear that, oh, just be careful with the ticks. And why is that? Well, because they can transmit a disease to us. One of them is Lyme disease. So if you go to a trail, you will see those announcements about the ticks and about Lyme disease. They need to be careful. So there is an important risk factor. So what is going to happen is that to prevent that, we all need to take our part, right? So we need to take precautions when we go to the wilderness. Our healthcare system need to be aware of that and try to prevent and treat the disease. And also some of them are carried by our pets. So we need to take care of them and also to avoid the transmission. All right, so what I'm gonna do now, is there any questions so far that you think that is like a burning question that we need to address now? Or what I'm gonna do now is gonna give you specific examples of diseases. And I need to let you know, I mean, I'm biased because I like viruses. So most of the examples are gonna be viruses, but if you want to hear about parasites or bacteria, just let me know. I can give you some examples. You will see that I'm biased on this one. So if there's no questions, I'll talk about a little bit about dengue and chikungunya. In the case of dengue, for example, and Zika, which is also a disease that has been present recently in the US and in Latin America. So these viruses live in the monkeys in the forest. So we call it the sylvatic cycle. So the virus goes from the mosquito to the monkey, vice versa, and stays there. So there's no problem in the sense that the monkeys are not that susceptible to the disease and they don't die. So they perpetuate the virus. Also, the mosquito can transmit it to their progeny transovatically, which is the TOT means transovatic transmission. So from mosquito to baby mosquitoes, they transmit the virus. So what happens when we disrupt this environment? For many reasons, right? So we need a place to live. So we cut some trees, build our houses there. So now we are in close proximity to this. So what is going to happen? This environment is disrupted. The mosquitoes come to this area. So in this area, we're going to start the first outbreaks. But both the mosquitoes and people can travel, right? Probably you know, but the mosquitoes can travel in the plane. If they go into the plane, they can travel wherever they want. Not because they want it, but they were trapped in the plane, so they can travel to somewhere. And then they come to the cities where we have the urban cycle of the disease, which is the one that we know and affect us with cases of dengue or chikungunya or Zika. So you see, again, we have the environment, we have the veterinary or the animal component, and we have the human component. So this is just to give you an example of how the virus can travel from place to place, and not only because of the mosquitoes, but because of people traveling around the world. Now it's easy to go from one place to the other. So I'm gonna give you an example of the introduction of dengue and chikungunya into Ecuador. And that also has to do a little bit with the economy and the social environment in different countries. And I'll try to explain that. So what they did, this is a province in Ecuador. What they sample people that have been infected either with chikungunya or with dengue. And then they did, probably you're familiar with ancestry.com or something, where they got the DNA and tried to find out the ancestors of you. So they did the same, but for the virus. They collect the viruses and they check the DNA and try to find the ancestors. So what they did is just check the information, the genetic information of the virus, and compare with what is out there. And they find out that these cases of chikungunya, sorry, of dengue first, they came from Colombia and Venezuela, which makes sense, right? They are close by. But what triggered that is that when there was some social unrest and economical problems in these countries, what people do is migrate to find opportunities in other countries, right? So some of the people that came to Ecuador, they were carrying the virus. So that's another example of how the economy of a country also has to do with the transmission of infections and diseases. In the case of chikungunya, the cases were traced to the origin of Caribbean islands. So that is another example of how these diseases can be traveling with people from place to place. All right, the next one is one that is in the news now, has been with us for almost 2 years now, unfortunately. So basically what happened, and until now, we don't know the source of SARS coronavirus. We know that a virus is a bat coronavirus. In the news, the one option was pangolin, other option was snakes, but we don't know for sure. I mean, there's theories that it was constructed in a lab, but that's another story. But in any case, what happened, it was transmitted to humans. And from there, it was transmitted to animals, as you can see, cats, ferrets, dogs, and tigers. And obviously also from human to human, which is the main route of transmission. We don't know at this point if these infected animals were able to transmit it to humans. That we don't know. What it has been shown is that humans infected this species. But that is, again, is an example of how when we disturb the environment, either going to the place where this animal lives, or when we bring these animals to the urban city to commercialize with them, I mean, they come with viruses, and that's a possibility for getting in a stretch contact with viruses that they are usually not in humans. The other example is NAPA virus infection. What was the source of NAPA virus infection? So there is in some areas, like in the Southeast Asia, where there is common practice to get, I would call the honey, or they call it zap or sap from palms. So the fruit, the people collect this, I call it liquid or syrup, sorry, not serum, syrup from these trees. But the thing is that also the bats eat that. So what it happened is that it's believed that when they collect this syrup, it was contaminated already with debris from the bats, and maybe has the virus. And once that you consume it, these viruses affected the humans. The other pathway that it may happen in is that since we need to build our animal facilities somewhere, so what happened is that you have a pig production close where the bats live. So what happened is some of the food that the pigs eat also got contaminated with bat poop and debris. So that's the way both humans and pigs got infected. So what happened later on is that people consume pork, which is infected, right? Like you can see this person eating, so they got sick. Then the virus was able to transmit human to human. And as I mentioned before, the virus can travel around the world with contaminated meat. right? So there is another case when we disrupt the environment where these bats live, and then we got the virus either an intermediary host like the pigs or directly to humans, and then distributed around the world. This is an interesting case, and I don't know if you watch this movie, you have a chance and you like what I've been talking about. Is a very interesting movie, and is based, the epidemiology that you will see in the movie is based on the epidemiology of Nipah virus infection. So you want to learn a little bit more of that, and you don't want to go and read all the papers, just go and watch the movie, and then you'll figure out what I was just talking about. So whatever happens, the movie is represented somehow here. All right. So sure, an idea, and I hope I have done this through the examples that I mentioned of what One Health involves, right? So you have an umbrella of One Health that covers many aspects: public health, environmental chemistry, vet med, human medicine, molecular microbiology, ecology, economics, and those, all of them interact and have an impact on human health individually, as a population, and the ecosystem health. So what I want you guys to think about it is that you can be part of any of these based on what you decided to do. I mean, you say, I want to be in human medicine as a physician, as a nurse. So you have a role in One Health. In that case, will be directly in individual human health. But if you say, okay, I want to do veterinary medicine, but I don't want to be treating dogs, and well, there's a lot of things that you can do as a vet, and I think I am an example of that. I work with infectious diseases, producing vaccines, and I'm a veterinarian. So, but you also can work in public health and do some more social training and teaching and educating people to try to see how we can improve the One Health. Or you like ecology, you can do it. So all of these have interactions with all of these diseases that you can see. So there is people that works with the diseases, as I do and others do. There is people that work with food safety. If you like food engineering, that's another area that you can do, and you will be also important for One Health. There is, as you can see here, vaccines and therapeutics. That will be something that I do. But there is people that do vector control. They do mosquito controls and all those things. And then on the human side, there's metabolic disorders that affects both human and also animals, believe it or not. Cancer and cardiovascular diseases also in humans and animals, and environmental hazardous exposures to human and animals, etc. So this graph gives you an idea of the ways that you can plug in One Health, and you can see that almost everyone has a part on this One Health solution. So as these slices, One Health involves everyone, you and me. It has some examples here: veterinarians, agricultural workers, pet owners. So if you have a dog and you take it out for pooping, it's important that you collect the poop, right? So that's your part. If you don't do anything else, do that, please, all right? Healthcare workers, obviously, scientists, ecologists, epidemiologists. You work in the lab doing tests for animals or for humans. Just if you're a phlebotomist that collects the blood so we can test the diseases and the antibodies, everybody is important. So if we work together is the key for One Health. So remember I told you about the rinderpest, the bad part. So there's something good that came out of of that, other than, yeah, once that we eradicated, a lot of the problems were solved, right? But that, to solve that, it took a consortium of different international institutions, governments, veterinarians, and the people that own the cows and the sheep and all the stuff. So also, some of the measures that we use now to try to control disease spread were tested first in this disease. So things that restriction of movement, when you cannot travel now. So it's thank you to what we tested in Rinder Pest, and we knew that it works, right? So isolation, disinfection, so all those measures were tested in this disease and show that we're effective in controlling the disease. So those have been applied to human disease. Also, important organizations were born in the efforts to control the disease. One of them is the OIE, which is the World Organization for Animal Health, which is the equivalent of the WHO. And also the first veterinary school was born with efforts trying to train people to cure this disease. And that's in the first vet school was born in Lyon, France, in 18 something. Don't remember the year. But those are the good things that came out from this outbreak, right? So the initial vaccine efforts helped to the development of the measles vaccines that we have now, because both measles and rinderpest belong to the same family of viruses. All right, so I want to end up with a good story from rinderpest. So just to let you know how veterinary medicine has an impact in our lives, in everyday lives. So now, what do I do to help? So as Regina mentioned, I work at Oro Vaccines, which is a clinical stage vaccine company that is designing and developing preventing and therapeutics vaccines for infectious diseases. At least here is some of the diseases that we are working on trying to produce vaccines against. So as I mentioned in the talk, we have trying to produce a candidate for chikungunya, candidate for human papillomavirus, respiratory virus, syncytial virus, NAPA, which is the one from the movie that I mentioned. So we are working on a vaccine against that disease. And another is diseases that are more exotic to the US, like Lassa and Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. So as you can see, as a veterinarian, I'm working on developing or helping developing vaccines that will be used in the human populations to prevent human diseases, right? So even though I don't have a medical degree and I don't work directly with patients, I'm part of the process with my degree of what it can, at the end, help the human population. All right, it's all that I have tonight. So these are some useful links that you can go to for more information on human health. So on One Health, so the World Health Organization. Here's, I apologize, it's an E instead of an R. It's a typo there. EcoHealth Alliance is in New York City. So this is probably a way to connect with them if you're really interested and, I don't know, think about an internship there or something like that. So you don't have to leave the area. The University of Davis has, the vet school has a very good One Health Institute. My USA alma mater, which is Washington State University, has a Global Health Institute, which is very good. And they are working towards the eradication of rabies in Africa. And obviously, oral vaccines, I have to say that. Right? So we all the time we are growing and we are looking for talented people to help us to achieve those goals. So take a look at the website and see if there's something that you're interested in. And also, I'm always available if you have any questions. Just ask Regina or Bernie, and they can forward those to me. All right. that will be it. I don't know if there's any questions or.
Okay, do you want to, let's see, do you want to stop share so that we can see people's faces?
Yep.
And then, I had one sort of, just kind of nitpicky question that I was curious about. When you were talking about the Nipah virus, you talked about how it was transmitted like through food, right? The sap was contaminated by the bats, and then the pig food was contaminated by bats. So that was all ingesting, right? The food. How did it change when it went from human to human? How did it transmit from human to human?
Yeah, I think the virus, I mean, now it's known that also transmit by respiratory droplets. So at that point, I mean, we think the SARS was contaminated food, but as you know, some viruses transmit in different ways. So I think Nipah can be transmitted either oral route or respiratory route.
Interesting.
Victor,
Madeline?
oh,
Go ahead.
Regina, I think one of my students had a question. She had messaged me
Oh, okay, go for it. Yeah.
if Victoria is on. It was a really interesting question. Victoria, are you there still?
Yeah, I'm here. Her name is Victoria. I had a question about the mad cow disease. So my family was in Europe during the mad cow disease. So like Dr. Carlos told me that it wasn't a virus. So how exactly do prions fit into like the concept of environmental health and like human disease?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, I don't know if you have the chance to learn about the difference between viruses and prions, but prions basically is a malfunctioning protein in the animal, and later on, if you get it in humans. So there is a protein that is normal. We have it normally, but when we get this malfunction disease or the animal get disease, the role here for environmental is that this disease is transmitted because some of the animals are fed with other animals' residues, like a fish residues and stuff like that, to give them protein. But sometimes if it's not processed properly, because this protein is very resistant to heat, so you cannot destroy it easily. So if you don't take care of that and the food of your animals is contaminated, then you can spread that disease. And the problem with that, because there is no treatment, once that the disease is discovered, like in a farm, the only way to control it is to stop those animals from movement, and they have to euthanize all those animals, which has an impact, right? Imagine you have 1,000 cows and then you get the disease in your farm, even if it's just 3 cows, all of them has to be euthanized to stop the outbreak. So that has, again, an environmental impact and an economic impact.
I have a question.
Yep, go for it, Daniel.
Yes.
Okay. A quick question and a follow-up, if I may. Dr. Ley, can you identify one research study or paper that satisfies Koch's postulates, proving that a microorganism jumped from wild animals to humans and caused a particular disease? And for the benefit of the audience, Koch's postulates to identify the causative agent of an infectious disease are 4 parts. Number 1, the microorganism or other pathogen must be present in all cases of the disease. Number 2, the pathogen can be isolated from the diseased host and grown in pure culture. Number 3, the pathogen from the pure culture must cause the disease when inoculated into a healthy, susceptible laboratory animal. And number 4, the pathogen must be re-isolated from the new host and shown to be the same as the originally inoculated pathogen. And
Mhm.
it's important to stress the conditions of isolation and pure culture. This means the sample is not mixed with any other tissues, such as bovine serum or monkey kidney cells, nor contaminated with chemicals or drugs. And Koch's postulates are easily understood as common sense and are the scientific gold standard for proving causation of infectious disease. So again, the question is, can you identify one research study or paper that satisfies Koch's postulates, proving that a microorganism jumped from wild animals to humans and caused a particular disease?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I don't remember a paper on the top of my head that I can share that with Regina, and she can distribute it as needed. But there are different cases of zoonotic diseases that have been shown to accomplish the Koch postulates. And I was thinking about rabies, for example, which is, I mean, let's say, if we are talking about urban rabies, if we have a dog, for example, that is infected, and then the dog gets rabid and bites a person, right? So what we do is we retrieve the animal and we have it in observation. It has rabid signs, clinical signs. The animal is euthanized. And then the virus can be isolated from the brain. The conditions for the virus to grow, it could grow in let's say, cell culture, could be deprived of fetal bovine serum to accomplish one of the postulates to say, hey, it's not a contaminated from the bovine serum, right? Which is also, I mean, this serum has been sterile and filtrated, so they don't have rabies virus in it. So, but let's say we use a serum deprived cell culture, the virus can grow there. So we can collect the supernatant and purify the virus from there, and we can do electron microscopy to actually see the bullet-shaped virus. And we can take some samples and inoculate it in mice, for example, intracerebrally, and we can reproduce paralytic disease in the rodent. And we definitely can collect the brains from the mice and isolate the virus again through all the process, purification, and then we can see the actual virus through electron microscopy. So as I said, nowadays, when we have a new disease, it's a requirement almost in the scientific field to try to prove the causality by accomplishing these postulates. So there's some papers that specifically mention that, but I don't have that on the top of my head, but I definitely can share something with you.
I would really be interested to see that. I know for the SARS-CoV-2 virus that it has not been isolated in pure culture. It's been with bovine serum and monkey kidney cells, and the electron micrograph images are very vague. They're just budding particles that are sort of emerging from a cell, and they're not, it definitely was not isolated in pure culture.
Yes.
It hasn't been done yet in almost 2 years. I wonder, can you explain why that is? Why they haven't isolated the SARS-CoV-2 virus in pure culture?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of the problems. Maybe the virus it's not happy, but you're not in a pure culture. What you mean pure culture with no
contamination, no bovine serum, no monkey kidney cells, no antibiotics, and no other chemicals?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do that in the lab setting, right? Because usually the cells, as you know, they require nutrients, right? So even if it's not a viral cell, which is a monkey origin, let's say it's a human respiratory epithelium, which now we have those that we can grow in vitro, when we can have the 3D dimension in the culture with the cilia and the movement and all stuff, and the virus grows there. But
Okay, but if you can't grow the
that's,
virus, if
environment
excuse
that
me, if you-
bacteria.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
If you can't grow the virus outside of a cell culture with the nutrients and the tissues, how is it that the virus spreads through the air and is infectious on, say, surfaces?
But it's infectious
that
for a
possible?
limited time. Yeah, it's infectious for a limited time, right? So it doesn't have the cells to grow and replicate there. So if a person with SARS-CoV sneezes on the doorknob, and then I come 2 hours, 5 hours later, probably it's not a problem. If I come in a short period of time, then there's a problem because there's some viable particles there. So that's different, like with bacteria, that they can grow in they don't require cells. That's a problem with the viruses, that they are intracellular parasites, that they need cells to replicate. So they can stay in the surface, but not for long time.
It seems like you would be able to isolate them, scrape them up, and be able to isolate them if they. Anyway, I'll be interested to see the paper that satisfies Koch's postulates. Great, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. If I will try to find it and send it to Regina, and she can share with you.
Great, thank you.
Madeline, I saw you had posted something that you want to make a comment or have a question.
I had West Nile going back maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I can't remember quite when. But when West Nile first came on the scene, there was a tremendous amount of deaths of local birds. And that was attributed to West Nile. Now, we talk about that interrelationship, right, between ecology, humans, animals. And when I got it,
Oh, she froze.
I know what she was gonna say.
they said, oh, you have standing water. That was the cause. I said, and I asked them, but aren't you going to collect the mosquitoes? And they said, no. I said, then how do you know what the source of my West Nile was? In addition, I was working up at the college in Rockland County, which supposedly was infested with West Nile. So I think there's a disparity there, that in order to be able to understand the distribution of a virus, there has to be major understanding of the source. And the only way you're going to get the source is to test what you would think the vector would be.
Yeah,
so that was my point that I wanted to make.
Yeah, and that's happened all the time. I mean, we don't see it often, but there's people that devote their lives to go and catch mosquitoes. There's a group in Tennessee that works with influenza, with avian influenza. So they go to the places where the migratory birds come, and they go and collect poop from those animals just to see which influenza virus are they shedding. So there's people that do that, but we don't see it all the time, right? But there's people that has devoted their lives to capture mosquitoes, to dissect a mosquito, to get the gut of the mosquito and try to isolate the virus from there.
Right. I mean, that would make sense. And that would support what you're saying, that there's got to be this interrelationship, right, in order to understand that disease or to minimize that disease. That would have been a very important component, which our Department of Health did not do.
Yeah, definitely. That's another problem that we have when we have our training in our medical students, and you will see it later on when you go to see your physician, we know the common diseases, right? When it comes to an exotic diseases, like for example, you go to Africa and they come back with malaria, your family doctor, he doesn't know what's going on, you know, because this is a disease that they don't see at school. They don't see any patient with that. So when it comes, it's hard for them to diagnose, right? So that happens with West Nile virus, for example. Sometimes happens with weird presentations of Lyme disease, where people forget to mention the doctor that they were hiking like 2 weeks ago, and then it's hard to get the diagnosis of that. So that's hard with the we call it exotic diseases, right? For our physicians, because they are not trained on those.
Right.
Any other questions?
I had one.
Mhm.
I was just thinking about when you had talked about the like rabies and like just animal diseases. I'm taking botany with Dr. Alvarez right now. And so we talked about the medicinal properties of plants. And so do you think it's possible if when we like urbanize areas and cut down certain like plants and trees and that and like wildlife and disrupt their habitat, do you think when they have those animal diseases, we're taking away possible medicine, like natural medicine that they could have eaten, or like, does that make sense?
It makes sense, and I'm probably not with rabies, but with other diseases that may happen. If we alter the environment and we alter the plants that they eat, the fruits that they eat, I mean, we don't know if that's the plant or the fruit that is protecting them to get sick, right? Because we don't know, right? When we go to the forest and we see those monkeys and they have the virus, but they look fine. So why is that? It's because they are having some things in the environment that protects them, and it will be the plants that they eat or the food that they have, you know? We don't know. And if we disrupt that, we disrupt the natural protection that they have. Yeah, that's possible.
I know I have a student who had a question. Zamira,
Mhm.
do you want to ask it or you want me to ask it? I don't know if she has her microphone on.
She just unmuted herself.
Okay.
She's on.
Go ahead, Zamira.
Hi, Professor. My name is Zamira. I'm currently a student of Dr. Khanis, and I just have this interest on, especially when you talk about the dengue virus or chikungunya. I'm from Sri Lanka, which is in a very typical country, and we get affected with these viruses very badly. Even now, India, Sri Lanka, these typical countries are getting affected. So when you do any research or when you collect samples, do other countries come up with these samples, or is your research based only on one particular country to find the root of the virus, why this is not diverse? Because when we focused only on one country and when it's not diverse, can we make an perfect vaccine or perfect outcome which can help the tropical countries, undeveloped countries to come up with? As a personally family members who have this virus affected and the term period they went through it, that's my first question. How can we do that? And the other part to the question is, when we make these viruses in laboratories for our experimental purposes, can this virus become twice the effective or twice the causing problems to human, or could it be destroyed in there, especially with dengue or any other virus type?
Yeah, thank you, Samir, for your question. For the first part, usually when we do research, we consider where the endemic zones are for these diseases. As you know, dengue and chickpea are not very prevalent in the US. So what we do is to collaborate with people in different countries and have their input. As I mentioned in the last slide, some of these One Health institutes, they have a collaboration with different universities in different places, including Sri Lanka, India, China, where they get collaborations to study how the disease behaves. But going to the vaccine part, which is what I'm working on. So when we produce a vaccine, for example, for chikungunya, so we are gonna do the first test in humans here in the US, just to show that the vaccine protects and works. But then our next step is to do it in India. So we're gonna do the test in humans in an Indian population, where chick is endemic, right? To show that the vaccine is safe and the vaccine is protective. And then this called phase 2. And then the phase 3 includes different countries that are affected. Could be either Sri Lanka, could be either Brazil, where chikungunya is very prevalent. So it has to be at least 4 or 5 countries where we test and we saw that is protective, that is safe, is effective, and also takes in consideration what you mentioned, the genetic diversity that we have in the different countries, right? So that has to be, it takes in account when you develop a vaccine. And for the second part, yeah, so when we work with the virus in the lab, what we try to do is to understand how the virus affects the cells and how the virus affects either the animal or the human. In that process, even if we manipulate it, so the idea is to produce a virus that is attenuated, so we can use it as a vaccine. In the US, there is a government body or organization that oversees the manipulation or genetic manipulation of viruses and bacteria and DNA. So we have to follow certain regulations. So if there's anything that comes out to be worse than when it's outside, it has to be destroyed. We cannot use it even for experiments, even in the lab, because there is a risk, especially if it's a disease that we don't have treatment or vaccine against it. There's a famous case of influenza, the avian influenza, which is highly pathogenic in birds and in humans. So there was a group in Netherlands and a group in Wisconsin working on transmission, how we can understand transmission. And it turns out that they develop a virus that transmits easily, so it transmits better. So that was a scare for the government, right? Because, oh, now we have a deadly virus that transmits better. It turns out that the virus is crypt, so it transmits better but doesn't cause much disease. But that fact causes the government to have a pause. So for 5 years, people cannot work on that virus until the government find out what's really going on, right? So there is check and balances, at least in some countries, right? In the US, we have those. In other countries, I cannot speak from them. In Mexico, we do, but other countries, I don't know. I hope they do. I mean, I trust that for the most part, scientists, they have good intentions, right? Or we have good intentions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, no problem.
Great, thank you, Zamira. Great, any other questions? Well, I would like to heartily thank Victor for a great lecture and awesome discussion at the end and great questions from everybody.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated all of, and I hope the students did too, how he connected all of the different, career paths that students can take, and how that connects with everything. And so when I'm talking to my students about, let's plant and let's restore the ecosystem, this is why. And so that's one of the reasons why. And then just really take to heart all the different, that slide was amazing, under the umbrella of all the different careers that help with this and add to this. So I really appreciated that, and I hope the students did too.
Yeah, it was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have questions about you want to become a vet, let me know. I can talk to you about it.
Yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to him, just let me know. I can connect you guys. So so again, thank you, and I wish everybody a great night, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on campus or at the next talk.
Very much so. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Alvarez,
Yes, I'm still here.
you're still here.
Hi,
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Just want to talk to you once everybody. I think Dr. Khan has left too.
Yeah, she did.
She did. Okay. You want to wait for a minute, just after everybody leaves? Just wanted to talk to you about their so interested about your gardening project in their campus.
Oh, yes, I'm going to email you, and there's one other student who's not in the botany class, who expressed a lot of interest also, because I was waiting because the second, so I have two projects. One is a very small one that I'm doing with my classes, and then one is at the library, at the new patio that they made. And we just got permission today to do the planting. So I was going to email you and Claudia, the other student, and talk to you and as soon as, and say that this is happening. And so we're going to plan to plant sometime in November. I don't have the date yet.
Okay.
But we'll get together before that so you guys can see it. And Claudia is an artist, so maybe we can do some, before and after sketches. I want some ideas from you guys about, what you think of it, and from this where we can grow the program, because this is a nice start. It's a small area, but it's a good start.
I was talking to Dr. Karnas regarding how that one trip made a good impact on me and my baby, because when we see it, he loved the soil and he was planting it. He was so excited.
So great. We got some wonderful photos of him, of everyone, but some great photos of him planting with those giant gloves that he was wearing. It was so cute. But it was so obvious that he loved it. I was so happy.
I was thinking, and I wanted to give her like a project proposal, or I'm not so sure how we put into words, but if we can do this in a semester or just see how it works with students, because I see that while doing this, if we make it as an semester for students to take it, it's like they take it as a class, but it's all hands-on. They coming to class, they will have like a small part to make their own compass, and they make the compass. Their friend is their tree, but whichever the tree, either a fruit or a vegetable tree, and they plan that throughout the semester with your guidance.